The airport buzzed, a sea of faces all going somewhere. I navigated the throng, weary from travel. The air hung thick, heavy with the scent of jet fuel and anticipation. I just wanted to get home, to my own bed, my own life. I pushed through the crowd, eyes searching for a familiar face. My driver, Jake, stood by the baggage claim, a reassuring presence in the chaos. He offered a gruff nod, taking my suitcase with a practiced ease. "Long flight, Mr. Thorne?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I grunted in response, my gaze drifting back to the crowd. Something felt off. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. The man's cough echoed in the cavernous space. People around him shifted, some giving him a wide berth. He didn't seem to notice, his body racked with another coughing fit. I found myself transfixed, unable to tear my eyes away. His face was contorted in pain, his breath ragged and shallow. He doubled over, clutching at his stomach. His coughs grew louder, more desperate. A woman near him, her face etched with concern, asked if he was all right. He didn't answer, his body convulsing with each cough. I felt a chill watching him. This was no ordinary cough. Then I saw it. A thin trickle of blood seeped from between the man's fingers. His grip tightened on the luggage cart, knuckles turning white. He coughed again, a wet hacking sound, and a spray of blood erupted from his mouth, splattering onto the polished floor. Panic rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, my blood turning to ice. The man's body crumpled to the floor, a broken marionette in a pool of his own blood. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, thick and cloying. The screams around me seemed distant, muffled, as if from another world. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as the horror unfolded before my eyes. Airport security swarmed the area, their faces grim masks of urgency. Medics rushed in, their expressions panicked as they assessed the situation, but it was too late. The man lay still, his chest no longer rising and falling. He was gone. Jake gripped my arm, his voice a low growl in my ear. "We need to go, Mr. Thorne, now." He pulled me away from the scene, navigating through the panicked crowd. I stumbled after him, my gaze locked on the pool of blood that stained the floor. A single thought echoed in my mind. This was just the beginning. The airport, once a hive of activity, transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Security personnel, faces tight with urgency, herded us like cattle, their voices sharp and amplified. A cacophony of languages swirled around me, punctuated by the panicked cries of children and the blare of sirens. We were trapped, caught in a net of fear that tightened with every passing minute. Jake, a stoic rock in the storm, pushed through the throng, his hand a vice on my arm. "Don't let go," he growled, his voice low and urgent. I clung to him, my senses overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of impending doom. The air, thick with the stench of sweat and fear, felt heavy, difficult to breathe. Every cough, every gasp for air sent a shiver of dread down my spine. Announcements, garbled and unclear, crackled over the loudspeaker, each one adding fuel to the inferno of panic. The word quarantine hung in the air, a death knell that sent chills down my spine. The faces around me, contorted with fear and confusion, reflected my own growing terror. We were trapped, locked in a cage with an invisible monster. We finally broke free from the airport's steel and glass moor, spilling out into the harsh glare of the setting sun. The city, usually a symphony of noise and light, felt eerily quiet, the air thick with a palpable tension. A lone helicopter buzzed overhead, its shadow a dark omen against the crimson sky. The city, once a symbol of progress and hope, was now a breeding ground for fear. The silence of the city was more unnerving than the chaos of the airport. We sped through deserted streets, the only sounds the rumble of our engine and the distant wail of sirens. The usual vibrancy of the city, the honking horns and bustling crowds, had been replaced by an unsettling stillness. It felt like the calm before a storm, a pregnant pause before the world as we knew it would shatter. Jake kept the radio tuned to the emergency broadcast channel, his brow furrowed as he listened to the increasingly frantic reports. The news, delivered in hushed, grave tones, painted a grim picture. The virus, fast-moving and deadly, was spreading like wildfire. Hospitals were overwhelmed, their corridors overflowing with the sick and the dying. The anchorman's face, pale and drawn, filled the screen, his voice trembling as he spoke of the horrifying symptoms. Victims are reporting a burning sensation on their skin, followed by rapid tissue breakdown, he announced, his voice barely a whisper. The authorities are urging everyone to stay indoors and avoid contact with others. Each word felt like a punch to the gut, stealing my breath and tightening the knot of fear in my chest. The world outside our speeding car, the deserted streets and darkened buildings, mirrored the desolate landscape of my thoughts. We were racing against time, against an enemy we couldn't see, couldn't fight. The usually bustling heart of the city was a ghost town. Shops stood shuttered, their windows dark and empty. Metal grills pulled down like eyelids, closing against a nightmare. Traffic lights blinked their meaningless signals at deserted intersections, the only witnesses to the city's sudden descent into silence. The air, thick with the metallic tang of fear, felt heavy, oppressive. We passed a playground, its swings swaying eerily in the gathering gloom, a stark reminder of the life that once filled these streets. A lone shopping cart lay overturned on the sidewalk, its contents scattered like the remnants of a forgotten life. The city, stripped bare of its human tapestry, felt like a stage set after the actors had fled. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat, a drumbeat of fear against the backdrop of the city's eerie stillness. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every corner a potential hiding place for the invisible enemy that stalked our streets. The city, once a source of comfort and anonymity, now felt like a vast concrete tomb. As darkness fell, casting long, menacing shadows across the deserted streets, we finally reached the relative safety of my apartment building. The doorman, his face pale and etched with fear, waved us through, his gloved hands trembling as he fumbled with the security system. Even in the supposed sanctuary of my own home, the fear followed me, a relentless stalker in the shadows of my mind. The television, a constant presence in my otherwise silent apartment, blared images of chaos and despair. Hospitals, overwhelmed and understaffed, resembled war zones rather than places of healing. The sick, their bodies ravaged by the unknown virus, lay on stretchers in hallways, their moans of agony a symphony of suffering. The news footage, graphic and unrelenting, showed doctors and nurses, their faces masked and haggard, battling a losing battle against the relentless enemy. The virus, merciless and indiscriminate, spared no one. The elderly, their frail bodies already vulnerable, succumbed quickly, their last breaths rasping whispers of fear and resignation. The young, their lives full of promise, fought with a desperate ferocity, their bodies racked with pain as the virus ate away at their flesh. Mothers wept over dying children, their tears powerless to wash away the horror that unfolded before their eyes. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of life, was unraveling thread by thread. The images on the screen, a constant loop of suffering and despair, were a macabre reflection of the fear that gnawed at my own sanity. Sleep was impossible, my nights haunted by visions of melting flesh and pleading eyes. The city held its breath, suspended between hope and oblivion. Days blurred into nights, each one indistinguishable from the last. The city, once a vibrant symphony of life, had become a silent, concrete tomb. The only sounds that penetrated the suffocating silence of my self-imposed isolation were the incessant drone of helicopters overhead and the chilling pronouncements from the emergency broadcast system. The death toll climbed with terrifying speed, each number a hammer blow to the heart of the city's dwindling hope. The virus, a relentless predator, tightened its grip on our collective throat, squeezing the life out of our dreams, our aspirations, our very humanity. The world outside my window, once familiar and comforting, had transformed into an alien landscape, a desolate wasteland where fear reigned supreme. The streets, empty and echoing, stretched out before me like the veins of a dying beast. The city held its breath, waiting, praying for a miracle that never came. The silence of the city was broken only by the drone of the helicopters and the static hum of the television. Days turned into weeks. The initial panic had given way to a dull, gnawing fear. The virus, it seemed, was a patient predator, content to pick us off one by one to savor our terror. I tried to maintain a semblance of order in my solitary confinement, clinging to routine as a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. But the city's fear had seeped into my bones, a constant icy dread that clung to me like a second skin. One morning I woke with a start, a strange tingling sensation on my arm. At first I dismissed it as a trick of my sleep-deprived mind, but as the day wore on, the tingling intensified, transforming into a burning itch that spread like wildfire across my skin. Panic seized me, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Could this be it? Was this the beginning of the end? I rushed to the bathroom, my reflection in the mirror a stranger's gaze. My eyes, wide with terror, stared back at me from a face slick with sweat. The itch was unbearable now, 1,000 needles pricking at my flesh. I clawed at my skin, desperate for relief, but the pain only intensified. The news reports, those harbingers of doom, had warned of this. The burning itch, the first telltale sign of the virus. I had seen the images, the horrifying progression of the disease. But nothing, not even the most graphic footage, could have prepared me for the sheer terror that gripped me in that moment. The city outside my window, once a symphony of human activity, had become a chorus of suffering. The silence, once so unnerving, was now shattered by the screams of the infected. Their cries, filled with pain and terror, echoed through the empty streets, a chilling testament to the virus's brutal efficiency. Each scream was a nail hammered into the coffin of humanity, a stark reminder that we were losing the battle. The virus, it seemed, was no longer content to work in the shadows. It had announced its presence with a vengeance, transforming the city into a macabre opera of pain and despair. The screams were a constant presence, seeping into my nightmares, haunting my waking hours. They were a terrifying reminder that I was not alone, that the virus was out there, waiting to claim me as its own. I tried to block out the sounds, to find solace in the silence of my own thoughts. But the screams were relentless, a constant assault on my senses. I covered my ears, trying to shut out the horror, but the cries seemed to penetrate my very bones, vibrating through me like a tuning fork. The city, once a place of hope and opportunity, had become a breeding ground for fear, a crucible where our worst nightmares were given flesh and voice. And I, trapped in my solitary confinement, was forced to listen as the city screamed its last breath. The itch was unbearable. It had spread now, consuming my entire body in its fiery embrace. My skin, once a source of comfort and protection, felt like a burning straitjacket. I scratched and clawed, desperate for any semblance of relief, but my efforts only intensified the pain. My fingernails, broken and bloodied, left trails of raw, weeping flesh in their wake. Then the melting began. It started slowly, a subtle tingling sensation on my fingertips. But it quickly escalated, a horrifying cascade of pain and revulsion. My skin, once firm and elastic, began to bubble and blister, the flesh beneath turning a sickly, translucent white. I watched in horror as my fingers, once strong and capable, dissolved into a putrid, oozing mess. The stench hit me then, a wave of nausea washing over me. It was the smell of death, of decay, of something ancient and evil. My own flesh, betraying me, was rotting on the bone. I stumbled to the bathroom, drawn by the primal need to see the horror with my own eyes. The mirror reflected a monster. My face, once familiar, was a grotesque mask of melting flesh. My skin slid off in thick, wet sheets, revealing the raw, pulsating muscle beneath. My eyes, wide with terror, were disappearing into the oozing mess of my skull. I was a living nightmare, a testament to the virus's terrifying power. The pain was unimaginable. It was a searing, all-consuming agony that stripped away every thought, every memory, every shred of hope. I screamed until my throat was raw, a primal howl of anguish that echoed through the empty apartment. But my cries were met with only silence. The city, it seemed, had grown accustomed to the sounds of suffering. I collapsed to the bathroom floor, a sobbing, broken heap of flesh and bone. The world around me swam in and out of focus, the boundaries of my own body dissolving along with my sanity. The virus, a malevolent puppet master, was pulling my strings, orchestrating my demise with cruel precision. I saw my reflection in the shards of a broken mirror, a grotesque parody of my former self. My skull, stripped bare of flesh, grinned back at me, a macabre death's head. My eyes, two milky orbs floating in a sea of blood and pus, stared back with a chilling emptiness. I was no longer human. I was a monster, a testament to the virus's terrifying power. In that moment, I envied the dead. They at least were granted the mercy of oblivion. I was condemned to endure this living hell, this waking nightmare from which there was no escape. The virus, a cruel god, had seen fit to spare me, to keep me alive in this state of abject horror. The world outside my window had faded into a distant memory. My universe had shrunk to the confines of my bathroom floor, a cold, tiled stage for my final act. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my body a battlefield where the forces of life and death waged a gruesome war. The pain had dulled, replaced by a strange numbness that spread through my dissolving flesh. I could feel my life force ebbing away, each breath a shallow gasp. Yet I clung to consciousness, trapped in the wreckage of my own body. They were the living dead, condemned to walk the earth as rotting, screaming testaments to the virus's cruelty. I was one of them now, a member of the walking dead. The thought filled me with a primal terror. I had seen them on the news, those unfortunate souls who clung to existence even as their bodies betrayed them. They stumbled through the deserted streets, their cries for help swallowed by the silence. I had pitied them then, those walking corpses. But now, as I lay here, my own flesh melting away, I understood the true horror of their existence, to be alive yet not alive, to be conscious yet trapped in a prison of pain and decay.
It doesn't.
The television, that flickering window to a world collapsing in on itself, sputtered and died. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the gurgling rasp of my own breath. The news had been my only connection to sanity, a lifeline to a world desperately trying to make sense of its own demise. Now even that tenuous thread had been severed. I lay on the cold tile, my body a landscape of pain and decay. The melting had slowed, but the agony remained, a constant gnawing ache. The silence, once a source of dread, had become my only companion. The virus was changing, adapting, becoming something even more terrifying than we could have imagined. They had told us that masks would protect us, that they were our only defense against the invisible enemy. We had dutifully donned our flimsy shields, our faces hidden behind paper and cloth. But the masks were a lie, a cruel joke perpetrated by a world desperate for a savior. I'd seen the masks discarded in the streets, lying amidst the melting corpses like fallen leaves. They offered no protection, no solace, no respite from the relentless advance of the virus. The masks, those emblems of false hope, had become nothing more than shrouds for the living dead. The radio, that crackling voice in the darkness, sputtered to life, offering a brief flicker of hope. Reports, fragmented and often contradictory, spoke of a potential cure, a glimmer of light in the encroaching darkness. Scientists believed they had isolated the virus, that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. But hope in this new world order was a dangerous commodity, a fleeting illusion. I had learned to distrust such whispers of salvation, to view them with a healthy dose of skepticism. The virus, I knew, was a cunning adversary, a master of deception. Each failed attempt at a cure only served to strengthen the virus's grip on our collective psyche. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of life, had become a skeletal husk, its bones picked clean by the relentless virus. Buildings stood empty, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at the wasteland. Streets, once teeming with traffic, were eerily silent, littered with the remnants of a civilization that had vanished almost overnight. I ventured out into this desolate landscape, drawn by a morbid curiosity and a desperate need to see for myself the true extent of the devastation. The air, thick with the stench of decay, caught in my throat, a constant reminder of the death that surrounded me. The silence was broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind as it whistled through the canyons of glass and steel. I found myself drawn to the city center, to the heart of the beast. The streets here were choked with debris, the air thick with the stench of decay. Buildings had crumbled inwards, their facades sheared off like skulls split open. And then I saw them, the bodies, thousands upon thousands of them, piled high in the streets, a grotesque monument to the virus's insatiable hunger. The city, once a vibrant hub of humanity, had become a charnel house, a vast necropolis dedicated to the victims of the plague. The stench of death was a living presence in the city of bones. It clung to the back of my throat, a rancid taste of the apocalypse. The cries of the dying, once a symphony of suffering, had been replaced by a chilling silence. I wandered through this wasteland, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. The buildings, once symbols of human aspiration, now loomed over me like accusing specters. And then I heard it. A faint moan carried on the wind, a whisper of agony from a soul not yet extinguished. I followed the sound, my footsteps slow and deliberate, my gaze scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The building was dark and silent, the air thick with the dust of decay. I moved cautiously through the shattered remnants of the lobby, my hand tracing the contours of a fallen chandelier. The moan came again, guiding me deeper into the belly of the beast. I climbed a flight of stairs, the steps crumbling beneath my weight. The air grew colder, heavy with the stench of rot and the metallic tang of blood. In the center of the room, illuminated by a sliver of moonlight, lay a figure, a mound of melting flesh and bone. The figure on the floor was beyond help. Its body, ravaged by the virus, was little more than a pulsating mass of raw flesh and exposed bone. Its eyes, two milky orbs floating in a sea of pus, stared up at me with a chilling emptiness. It was alive, but barely, its life force flickering like a candle in the wind. The city outside, the city of bones, seemed to press in on me, its silence a suffocating weight. The city was grinning, its skeletal buildings baring their teeth in a macabre smile. The figure on the floor shuddered, a wave of tremors rippling through its dissolving flesh. Its breathing, shallow and ragged, grew fainter with each passing moment. The flies, drawn to the sweet stench of decay, buzzed lazily around the open sores. I knew then that there was nothing I could do to ease its suffering. The virus had already claimed this soul, leaving behind only a hollow shell. The city outside, the city of bones, awaited, its silence promising an oblivion that both terrified and seduced me. I turned to leave, my hand reaching for the doorknob, desperate to escape the stench of death. And then I saw it, a small leather-bound book lying on the floor next to the dying figure. It was out of place amidst the carnage, a single spark of color in a world drained of vibrancy. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the worn leather, feeling the weight of its unspoken words. I began to read, my voice a hushed whisper in the silence. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the heart of the rot. The journal trembled in my hand, its pages filled with a stranger's story, a story that mirrored my own. The writer, a woman named Sarah, had documented the horrors she witnessed, the slow, relentless unraveling of society. Her words, etched in ink stained with tears and blood, were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a refusal to surrender even in the face of unimaginable darkness. She wrote of her search for meaning amidst the madness, her desperate attempts to find a cure, a way to fight back against the insidious enemy that had consumed their world. Her words, filled with pain and defiance, resonated with a chilling familiarity. They were the echo of my own thoughts, my own futile struggle to make sense of the apocalypse. As I turned the brittle pages, each one a fragile link to a world that no longer existed, I felt a strange sense of connection to this woman I had never met. Her words, her fears, her hopes, they were my own. She wrote of a world on the brink, of the fragility of life, of the enduring power of love and hope, even in the face of death. And then I reached the last page. The words ended abruptly, cut short mid-sentence. The final entry, dated just days before, spoke of a discovery, a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. She had found something that could potentially turn the tide against the virus. But before she could reveal what she had found, the journal entries ceased. I closed the journal, Sarah's words echoing in the silence of that ruined room. The dying figure on the floor had breathed its last, its body finally succumbing to the virus's relentless assault. The flies, their gruesome feast interrupted, buzzed impatiently in the stillness. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the journal heavy in my hand. The world outside, the city of bones, awaited. But something had shifted within me. Sarah's words, her unwavering belief in the possibility of hope, had sparked a flicker of defiance in the ashes of my despair. The virus had taken everything from me, my family, my friends, my world, but it hadn't taken my will. I would honor Sarah's memory. I would find what she had found. I would finish what she had started. The city outside was a tomb, its streets littered with the bones of the fallen, but even in death, there was beauty. The bones, bleached white by the sun, stood as silent witnesses to the resilience of life, a testament to the enduring power of hope. The world was ending, but perhaps in the ashes of the old, something new could rise. I didn't know what the future held, but I would face it head-on, armed with the memory of Sarah's words and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest of nights, a single spark of hope can ignite a fire that will burn away the shadows.